don't have the magazine cover. I may have it, but it's not here. Veracruz. What's up with Veracruz? So I had a pretty good time with it, actually, for a little magazine game. I think it's kind of a kick. It's got some neat new systems. It definitely shows its burginess in terms of both random tables and whatnot that can have a fairly significant influence on the play, but also a fairly random combat system, which can do so as well. So let's talk about things pretty quickly. Components. Counters, standard SPI quality. I'm used to these suckers. I love them. They're matte finish. Every now and then there's one that's the wrong size or shape. They had some weird cutting issues with some of them. This one came out fine, but sometimes the counter sheets are a little weird, like there'll be a big counter and a small counter. The map, pretty standard Simonson, the SPI counters are Simonson designed. The map is Simonson designed. It gets all the information across pretty clearly. The one thing that I found kind of painful was this 10 here written in blue was almost impossible to read. And it's kind of iffy, these tracks with all the reinforcements on them. I kind of like them, but they take up a hell of a lot of space, and some of the charts and tables could have been shrunk down into those spaces. Might have been a better solution than slipping them into the rules, especially since one of the little charts is actually not even in this section with the charts and tables, but there's a couple of different die roll places, but one thing that is a little chart was embedded just in the rules. The rules themselves are your Dunnigan designed, standard case setup, which is why I played it. It's why I picked this guy up. That not originally buying it. I bought it because the games that were coming out in the era that I bought it in were, at least the magazine games, were for the most part pretty damn crappy. Because we're talking about an era where S&T had changed hands a few times. I think it was already probably in Decision Games' hands when I bought this. Because I really can't remember when I got this, so it must have been pretty late. The stuff that was put out by 3W, Wargamer and stuff like that was in really horrible magazines. Like the quality control was just so poor on them, and the games felt largely like rehashes of stuff from this golden era, And this is late enough, this is 77, it's late enough where SPI was beginning to feel around and find new ways of doing things. And you can probably blame a fair amount of that on Richard Byrd, to tell you the truth. May he rest in peace. I'm still pissed at him for blocking me on Facebook, but... all right. What about the core systems in the game? Well, supply, pretty simple for the Mexican player, feels like any operational game of its time period. For the US side, they have to handle the fact that essentially General Scott decided, screw it, I'm cutting my supply lines and I'm just marching inland and carrying my supply with me. And that idea is hard to represent in the types of games that were generally coming out in the era. So this idea of using the pack animals and carrying your supply and having, being able to create supply lines that transport them and use them, It feels like a precursor to the OCS games. You know, you're hauling individual supply units around, or to much lesser extent, much less intuitive design, another Berg game, which is Desert Fox. I'm guessing Campaign North Africa worked on this kind of system where you were actually transporting actual supply points around. I don't have it, haven't played it. I've seen boxes. I know people who've played it. Didn't see a point once DAC came out, and I really fucking have to get to DAC, don't I? Like, screw my decision to try and do OCS in some kind of chronological order in terms of when the battles happen, which is what I kind of want to do. But it's like, no, I want to do DAC, man. I really, that's the one I bought. That's the one I wanted to have, you know. And maybe Sicily that I don't have yet. Someday maybe. And Tunisia, which I do have, would be interesting. But anyway, reinforcements. So for the Mexicans, they have a little bit of randomness, but most of them are preset. And for the U.S., they're mainly preset. Nothing too exciting here. The Mexicans have guerrillas. The Mexican guerrillas are a means of interfering with any kind of supply path that the U.S. is trying to trace through. The U.S. can't garrison a supply path. They can't just keep one open. And this is why they kind of have to just, hey, you want supplies? You got to march them in from the coast with a force, and you have to defend that resupply effort. And that creates kind of a neat little design. They're a clever system where they just randomly pop up and do what, maybe take out your supply, maybe they don't. Mexican political considerations. This is Chromie Berg stuff, but how else do you explain what happened during the campaign where Santana went back to go campaign for president in the middle of his military campaign? Sure, you could do it with pure scripting. You could do it in a CDG type system where you have to play, where you play a card and cost the Mexicans something there. But yeah. The regular movement system, very, very fluid movement. Felt maybe too fluid. The roads and whatnot allow you tremendous movement across the map. I don't mind that at all. That feels fine. Because unimpeded, the march rates of these forces should be quite high. And it's actually something that a lot of games get very, very wrong, or have to impose some kind of strategic movement rules or whatever. This actually does a pretty good job. It says, as long as you stay on the main highway, you're fine. And if you stay on the roads, you're okay. And if you go off of them, though, that's where the movement started seeming a little too rapid. It felt too easy to outflank, to surround an enemy force, and just basically get your troops into play in a pursuit or whatever. I think some of that has to do with the time scale of the turns. They're fairly long periods of time, and not like 2-day turns or whatever, where you kind of get to micromanage the forces moving away from each other and trying to escape. So it's kind of hard to get away from the enemy is probably the biggest thing. And that is a big problem for the U.S. if they start losing, because they've got a coastline in their way. But whatever. Demoralization. One of the results of combat is demoralization. That reduces your movement capability. It very heavily influences and reduces your combat capability. And the way it works is if you make an attack, if you're attacked on the opponent's turn, you get a chance to recover during your own turn. You will automatically recover, basically. You can't do much with the force. You can't attack with it or whatever. And you're actually slowed down and can get pursued because of that. But there's nothing like in, say, is it Smith who? I think it's Eric Smith who wrote Civil War. There's nothing like the kind of, hey, I'm sitting here kind of demoralized, the opponent could get a jump on me. Nothing along those lines. Of course, that's a pulse game. This is not. So you get a chance to, you will rally if you're attacked by the opponent. If you attack in your own turn and fail, the opponent gets a chance to come back at you and do a counterattack and smack you back. And in some ways that feels right? You know, it's the counterattack that gets you. But in some ways it feels like there should be a potential for a continual pursuit. There is, it's just you won't be demoralized. You might be in as bad a shape because of the general morale rules, which we'll get to, which are something else, the national morale rules. Combat itself is broken into two different types of combat, siege and normal combat. Siege combat is really not all that exciting. You line up some artillery, roll on a table, and you reduce the town. The kind of cool part about it is the defender can receive honors of war before any die roll to siege or assault the town at any point. And that's pretty impressive, actually. You don't even call them honors of war in here. But the normal combat is this complicated mechanism of rolling. So first you take into account the national morale levels of each country, which basically winning battles gets you more morale, losing battles loses you morale, as long as armies are involved. And we'll talk about armies in a bit. You roll a die and modify it by the morale level, and that gets you a battle level morale. Then you count up your leader levels, and you roll another die to see how well they do that day, whether, you know, one of them has diarrhea or something. Then you use the odds chart, and you'll shift the odds based on the quality of the morale and leadership and whether there's a higher army formation in play. On this chart, roll a die there. Okay, that's the third die roll and third calculation of some sort. Although I guess just looking up the national morale isn't that big a calculation. To get a result. The result will be split into two things for each side. One, positionally, what happens? Do you advance, retreat, whatever? Are you demoralized? And two, a casualty level. All right, we were at what, 3 die rolls already? Fourth die roll is going to be on this casualty table where you compare the current morale, the casualty level gotten from the combat chart, and another die roll. That gets you a percentage. That percentage is then applied to the size of the force receiving the damage. The bigger your force, the bigger you take. Even if you're fighting a small force, if it does well against you, it rampages all over your ass. And then over here there's a little chart for a lookup to give you the percentages, which is helpful. But what do we got there? 1, 2, 3, 4 separate die rolls for combat. Now, wait. 3 of those 4 are both players rolling the dice. So it's actually 7 dice get rolled for each combat result. This is getting to be a gamer's style, system, except it's much more do this, do that, do the other. Well, you could argue the same thing with some of the gamers' systems as well. So, yeah, that sounds like a really mechanically complex and obnoxious combat system. But It forced me to write down results, which is a good thing, because I get kind of a compendium of what happened in the course of the game. I don't think this is going to happen. Well, it seems to have. I don't know what the hell was going on, but like my voice just stopped there. Some nuts. I'm allergic to nuts. I shouldn't eat them, but I like. They're snacks. I like snacks. In addition to that, the layers of different dice and different pieces of information gives me a little narrative for each of these battles. And I understand what happened in the battle. And by writing it down, I really kind of understand what happened in the battle. I compared it a lot to Empires in Arms' combat system, thinking that one gave me more for about the same amount of effort, approximately. I'm actually pretty happy with this as well. And I feel like this gives the kind of information that, say, the CWB games give, in terms of like, all right, not the line of battle. Line of battle smoothed everything out and kind of took away something I liked, which is that mechanical complexity. That mechanical complexity comes with additional story. And I don't like losing that story. I really kind of don't like losing that story. And that's the sad part for me. Anyway, let me just flip through, check some other things here to see if anything's kind of wacky. There are a couple of places where the rules were a little iffy, but there were only 4 pieces of errata. None of them of any importance. There are a couple of places where you have to make some minor decisions as to how the game actually should work. Maybe. They may not come up in any given game. No stacking limits, essentially. So the concept of the national morale and the battle morale, that's really kind of key, because it kind of snowballs what happens to you. You start losing battles and your army starts falling apart, and it just won't be able to continue fighting. If you screw up your supply or something along those lines, you could end up in just as bad a position, because that could get you on the path down the bad snowballing. There's disease and attrition. It feels like something like this should be applied to the game. That the armies, both armies, were weakened by this, perhaps to different values. And again, this being a Berg game, a table is put in play for how much disease is affecting, and it's rolled on a per force basis, and it gives you a lot more granularity and a lot more story about what might be going on. Hey, maybe one commander's, dug his latrines better or whatever, or has netting with him, because it's probably mosquitoes more than anything else. Well, dysentery too, but don't drink that water, seriously. I wasn't in Mexico, I was in Venezuela, but I got really bad dysentery when I was like 5. One of a couple of times they thought I was going to die. But, yeah, it feels right, I guess. Some of it feels kind of like, what can you do? You're just rolling on a die, and it doesn't have all that much impact because both sides get a percentage of their troops gone. It ends up being not really affecting the odds too much, not really having too much effect on anything. But if you took it away or simplified it, it would take away some of the story that you're getting, even if a design, a more smooth design would be easier to play and give you the same results. And I'd actually argue, I don't want just the results. I want those intermediate steps. I want to see what's happening. Now, in some cases, that can be too much. And It's a hard call. Is it too much here? I don't know. Um, I'm okay with it. I'm okay with it. There are dummy units, and you're not allowed to, and limited intelligence, you're not allowed to look through the opponent's stacks. You pretty much know what the opponent's got. It's either clear from setup and the reinforcement track, or you got smacked by him, or you smacked him, and you got a pretty good idea how big his force is. You won't know the exact numbers. You won't be able to necessarily figure out the exact values that you're going to have on the odds chart. There's a little bit of reconnaissance capability there. That's still not going to give you the odds chart values. If an enemy attempts to do something really, really sneaky, and I didn't do anything like this, and I don't think there's much room for it. If the enemy attempts to do something really, really sneaky, you might be able to reconnoiter the enemy and get an idea of what they have. I don't tend to do the, let's make two big stacks of units and make one of them have no strength and the other one, or almost no strength, and the other one be really powerful, and hope you hit the wrong one. And if you hit the one I don't want you to hit and wipe it out, it's not that big a deal. I've still got like my main force. I don't like playing that way in general, and I don't really think there would be that much advantage to doing so in this. But you've got capability of dummy counters for the US to make your stacks look bigger. You've got militia for the Mexicans, some of which could be zero strength and essentially become dummy counters as well. I've already talked, I think, about the guerrillas, the political rules. Gunboats, nothing too exciting there. They just bombard the cities. Actually, I never even looked at them. Yeah, it can only be used for siege bombardment. Okay. So I was right. The U.S. has a little problem, which is that about a third of their force is volunteers, and it's just going to leave about halfway through the game. They get more volunteers, but this historically, like, basically stopped Scott's invasion completely for, just stalled it out completely because he didn't have the forces anymore. Victory conditions and balance. The U.S. has to pretty much dominate, take Mexico City, take everything along the way in order to win the game. And that makes sense because historically they just rolled over everything. The game doesn't make that trivial. It doesn't at all. I think it comes down to who starts winning battles early on. And the U.S. has a significant advantage in the luck. They have a morale advantage. They have a leadership advantage. They should win the first battle in most games. If they win that first battle, I think it's going to steamroll the Mexicans. If they don't win the first battle, they still have a chance. They're not going to get steamrolled the way that they did in my game. It takes a series of bad luck for the U.S. to lose the game as badly as they did. However, as long as the Mexicans can kind of keep things close, as long as they don't get completely steamrollered, I think the U.S. could win a lesser victory or could gain ground without winning the game, even though they probably would win the war still under those circumstances. So I think there's fair flexibility there. Overall, I had a kick playing it, to tell you the truth. This really hit the right spot for me. It didn't require a hell of a lot of thinking. The rules were easily approachable because they're SPI style rules and not all the other crap that's out there for the most part. I mean, yeah, there are other companies that I respect, but maybe I'm becoming an old fogey. But I actually favored the campaigns of Marlborough, a fucking Wargamer rules, which is just an unmitigated disaster in terms of organization and whatnot. But at least it was sparse. It wasn't like, and not sparse in the Axis Empires sort of, let's be precise and get everything perfect, completely nailed down, but as few words as possible. No, it was sparse in the sense that they didn't give you all the rules. I prefer that to trying to nail everything down. To tell you the truth, I would rather open up a rule book and say, yeah, I don't feel like all the rules are here, but I feel like I can intuit them. I didn't have to do that here at all. Here, there were a couple of little ambiguities, but for the most part, pretty damn good rules, pretty solid, and the presentation of the Dunnigan format is just always. I respect it more and more every time I start looking at more modern rules. And I think it's the big reason that I liked SPI games better than Avalon Hill games. I think in general Avalon Hill games were better games, a lot of them. I mean, I'm not talking about the classics here. But I'm talking about, you pulled out more interesting stuff from Avalon Hill than SPI often put out. A lot of the SPI stuff wasn't fully developed, so like the game wasn't necessarily balanced or didn't really do everything it promised. Think Battlefleet Mars here. I feel like this does what it promises. It's a magazine game, damn it. It's a couple of hours of fun. You can play it a few times. You don't have to worry too much. You paid, if you had a subscription, you paid about $2.25 for it. You got a magazine to read that, that took you a couple hours to read, and you got a game that's you're probably going to get at least 8 hours of play off of a few little plays out of it. How can you beat that? Well, you couldn't. And the thing is, SPI actually made money off their magazine games. Cheap as they were, they made money off their subscriptions. Not so much off the lifetime subscriptions. Those were short-term cash grabs, but off the base subscription price, they were making money off of it, off the issues, or at least breaking even on them, and they were making money overall on the magazine by selling it in stores. It was $6 cover value. Still half the price of the cheapest boxed games of the era, and it was the fucking folio games that ruined the company. They were losing money on every single one. Well, what's your profit, plan for that? Quantity! We'll sell more! No, you're losing on everyone. Anyway, I enjoyed this a lot. I think we're going to be getting Plantation AL as the next thing. Although, I look around and I'm like, ooh, I want to do this, I want to do that. There's just so many fucking games I want to play. But, yeah. I'm glad I got this done. I played it once before. I didn't have much memory of it. I don't know how much I'd have now, but it is a cute little game. It really is, and I can't say anything against it. Is it worth picking up used? For the price these guys still go for, probably. Except for a few that are really, really well loved. You can usually pick these up, I don't know, $10, $15 maybe, and you're still getting a decent amount of game for that in these days. Now, if you go to like Consim World or something, man, $5 each or less, So if you're on the con circuit or whatever, you'll find people who are just like, yeah, I brought a box of games with me. It's late in the con. I'll give them for $2 each, which is about what I paid for these when I first bought them. Magazine games, like I said, they were like they were $2.25 for the whole magazine in the game. The guy I knew who used to sell his games after about a year or whatever, and I bought my first set of like 7 games off him. I bought more from him later. He would sell the magazine for $1 and the game for $1. And so, you'd be paying $2.25, and he'd end up paying $0.25 for a chance to play a game, for a chance to read the magazine, play the game as much as he wanted within, a year or two, and then just keep churning them around. That's not where I got this one. I don't know where I got this one. Wish I could remember. I might have gotten it at Crazy Igor's. It's quite possible. Anyway, up it goes.